Well, I'm sitting here in this apartment in what was the old Co-op department store in the early days of Ipswich, in fact, in the times we were talking about. And the I suppose the most historic thing from the Co-op was the wages raid. With the wages
You
raid.
weren't involved in that as
No,
well,
no,
were you,
it was
John?
nothing to do. It was nothing to do with that. We better not name the rumor of who did it, but it was done on motor bicycles.
Oh, right.
So
I used to have 3 of those in my shed, by the way.
yeah, so I'm with Tony James, who was we did an awful lot of odd jobs together, but mainly his most important contribution was as a photographer, and he'd come around with us on the music, on gigs and so forth. Or when I needed a publicity photograph, for instance, here we have this is before Job Warrior. This is Black Ivory.
Sure.
So so we have. I can remember most of the names of people. Rock, Lenny, who was guitarist, Goose, who was the lead singer, and that's Lenny's brother. And I forget the name of the bass player. The original bass player was Chief, but this was someone who was coming along after Chief. And I think at the time you worked for the GPO, as it was at the time, wasn't it? It was the GPO.
Indeed. Post Office Telecommunications, yeah. And I couldn't, it's just, these guys were free, and I wanted some of that.
So you gave up regular employment, but then they did.
End of 79.
So that would have been around 77 time, I should think. That was taken. 77, 78.
No, it was taken after that, John, in the 80s.
Was that?
Yeah, they were taken in the 80s.
Yeah. By that,
that's very early 80s.
Yeah. I can never remember when because anyway, irrelevant. It's around that sort of turn 70s, 80s time. And at that time, there were lots of music venues in pubs in Ipswich, and they paid money, didn't they?
Yeah,
that's really useful.
And it was really handy for me being a photographer, because I used to go to these gigs of bands that I didn't know at all, and shoot a couple of rolls of film. Then they'd ask me, you know, can they buy some, and yeah, so I'd knock up a proof sheet for them, and as you do, and a couple of finished prints as well. And invariably, have I said invariably twice in a sentence? I got to know these geezers, and they're really interesting. And they say they wanted some stuff done in a studio outside, in a form of where they're not jumping around or doing anything, just with their instruments. So we often used to arrange quite nice outcomings from that. So I was able to do this as a full-time sense, and I could cover a whole load of work, and I was really focused on my work. That's something I got into when I was about 8 or 9. Like quite a few years between the inception of photographs and actually utilising it.
And then we every time we wanted a photographer, band after band, there was Black Ivory. You took some for Warriors, didn't you? Job Warrior.
Sure.
I think I've got.
And I was roading for them. I used to take them to their rehearsal place, and they were a load of trouble. Getting packed away, pack your gear away, man.
Yeah, and then
they were good guys, but
and then later,
play you up.
Later with I remember you doing. I think we did it on Bourne Bridge, which crosses the Orwell.
Yeah.
Ipswich has 2 rivers, the River Gipping and the Orwell. Bourne Bridge crosses the Orwell, and so we'd always look for these atmospheric places for the publicity photographs. So we did the we did the funk band, jazz funk band. That one, the name I can't remember the name of them, but I looked after them. They were nine piece craziness.
Oh, really?
There was Dave who ran the comic shop.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And,
Yeah.
and all sorts of people in that.
You often see him. Have you seen him around?
No, no.
No, he's still around. He goes in the shop, and I asked him a few months ago if he's still around. I thought I knew he wasn't running it, but I was wondering if he actually still owned it. He said no, he sold out.
He was a saxophone player.
Yeah, he was, wasn't he?
So,
yeah.
So the brass sections used to move from band to band, and then you could actually get regular work as musicians. There was a nightclub in where I forget what Duke's. We just passed it. There was a lot of scantily clad people outside, but it wasn't Duke's. It's gone through several manifestations.
Yeah. In the Bud Market, was it?
Yes, yes. And
then it burnt down.
Did it burn down?
Yeah, it burnt down. Yeah.
And that bandbox. It was the bandbox.
Yeah, it was the bandbox.
Yeah. So, and I remember Duke's, my guitarist. We had a weekly gig there, and which there was gold dust to have a residency, but my guitarist mouthed off to the owner, and then I tried to negotiate the band back. They said to have the band back, but not with that guitarist. So
who was the guitarist?
Can
you remember?
No. And Jimmy.
Jimmy,
so
hello, Jimmy, if you're listening.
No, Jimmy heard. Well, he won't deny it.
He didn't set it on fire.
No. So but that was crazy because that was that band was a 9-piece, and it was like having a 9-piece family.
Wow.
People would be arrested from the front of the van because they hadn't paid a fine or something, and then there'd be wives ringing you up saying, "Where's my husband?" I say, "I want him back," and I say, "You can't have him back. He's playing on stage at the moment." And it was like having a 9-piece family. I virtually gave up.
Like a big family for you then, John, wasn't it?
So you were in and out of all that.
Yeah.
So you did photographs of posters for us and reproduce them.
Yeah, well, I used to take photos that you ended up by putting on posters. I didn't actually make posters up, flyers. So it's your department, really, or someone else?
I probably put it together using Letraset or cut out paper. It's the one we've talked a lot about. Do it yourself.
Well, often that's the best way of doing it. You got the thing right in the first go, and you didn't have to waste your time dropping stuff off and picking it up and a whole load of.
Yeah, so we cut out everything. Because Letraset was expensive, so
and very good.
Very good, but it would it was just as effective to cut out bits from newspapers, and so
you could do that.
Prittstick and Whitener actually did the job, which stretched over to sort of all the posters, punk and the fanzines and so forth. So, but your garden was extraordinary. So there was with pics that was in Henniker Road, and there was a big sound system lived opposite, so it was boom boom all the time.
Yeah.
And you had extraordinary things as like you had a complete telephone box in the back garden.
I did. I found it in the garden with a metal detector. And it was buried, would you believe? And parts of it were buried under the floor in the double garage. The garage had one side, one door on, and the other bit was open. And one roof was like that, and the other was corrugated. But I just happened to go over the floor, and I've been working around the ground, and I operated in the garden, in the shed, and got a massive readout, and size of phone boxes and bits. And in fact, the shed itself that was built of cut up telegraph poles. So someone, not me, had an influence in that type of stuff.
So that was coincidental.
That was coincidental.
That you as an ex GPO employee.
Had that kind of stuff.
But your knowledge of the GPO was incredibly useful because you were able to tell us that they wouldn't cut how many reminders you could have of your telephone bill before they actually cut you off. This was in the days before when they didn't like to cut you off.
No, that's right.
And so what venues do you remember for that time round Ipswich in particular?
Well, I did have a list on those something slides. Oh no, you've dropped me in the deep end, John. Here, no, you have to give me a few minutes.
Okay.
Another question.
Okay. I'll do some, and then you.
DT slides.
Yes. So there's a mulberry tree.
Yeah. The venues.
The venues.
Oh, sorry.
Not the bands. The venues.
Right. Oh, sorry. Yeah, most of the pubs, didn't they? Really?
Yeah. The regular ones were Mulberry Tree.
Yeah.
Running Buck, which is now a church. Well, it's a great shame.
Yeah. The Running Buck was an American kind of situation in the making, in the rendering, really, wasn't it? It was taken over by guys who drove English sports car with a wheel on the other side. The car. So that was very much a basis type of thing. Yeah,
well, that Gino Washington used to play there occasionally.
Yeah.
The last time I saw Gino was there. And then on Sundays, the Kingfisher was the musicians' pub because no one had a gig. The only gig that was going on a Sunday lunchtime was the Kingfisher. So
I believe it was, wasn't it?
So all the musicians of Ipswich, all that crowd, the bands you were involved with, would go to watch whatever was on in the
put forward.
So Fusion, that was and who Nick Kershaw was in Fusion, and so the Fusion's first LP I think had Nick Kershaw on, didn't it? I think, or maybe he'd left by then. So the Fusion was a mixture of Colchester and Ipswich musicians.
He lived at where did he live?
Well, he went to Northgate School.
Yeah. Well, I didn't know him until Copdark, I think he lived at that way.
Ah, right. So, and it's that generation of musicians. So there was, and they were incredibly skilled. That was the thing that I'd use some of them for backing bands at Colchester Arts Centre when we had the old blues guys over, like Buddy Guy's brother. I've forgotten his name, but it was someone Guy, and all those. And I remember that Tim Moe, who's a drummer, played with all the bands we were associated with.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, and he's still going actually. Tim.
Is he in Australia or something?
I don't know. Well, I last saw him outside Sainsbury's about 3 years ago, and he gave me a card. I asked for a card, and he gave me a card, which I can't actually find. I've got it in a whole, size box of cards.
Of stuff.
No, of cards.
Of cards.
They're all. I can flip through and find what I want, but it takes a little while to go through.
So Phil Guy was playing at Colchester Arts Centre. It was Buddy Guy's brother. And there was a saxophonist who lived in Ipswich who was, he died, but who was from California, African American.
Gene? No, not Gene.
No, Gene was guitarist.
Anyway, saxophonist.
Yeah. Saxophonist. So Phil and him were talking about in the dressing room about California. And suddenly it was time for Phil's set, and he hadn't told the backing band what they were doing. It's like working for me. No one knows no one's told in advance what they're doing.
Okay, John.
And Tim turned around and Phil said, "What are we going to play?" And Phil just turned around and said, "Follow my foot." It's a great set, obviously.
Oh, yeah,
But those guys
yeah,
could, and Gene was a
yeah,
guitarist, American guitarist, lived in Ipswich,
yeah.
and lots of people, but they'd moved bands. So Cruiser was sort of like one of the core bands that Ian Peppercorn and all those people played with over the years, and so what other venues were there? There was Copdock itself,
Well, there were just
Copdock
so many
Hotel.
of them to actually, remember. I mean, I do find it hard to remember just simply names of pubs.
I find it hard to remember yesterday. So
Let alone pubs with a musical aspect or an arts aspect.
yeah, so
I mean, like you've got obscure pubs like the Black Horse, I believe, have bands. And that was the least likely pub in our times, I think. To have
well, yeah, Black Horse was rough cider.
yeah, yeah, and still paying shillings and pence after we went to decimalisation. Do you remember
Indeed,
that?
but it was building a police station opposite the break.
Yeah, indeed, yeah, that as well.
The clientele got
Yeah.
far shyer after that. There's the Black Horse would use their side rooms and things. We'd use that for poetry and stuff. And then we'd do the occasional show in the Arts Theatre on Monday nights. I think you came along to some of those and took some photographs.
Yeah, very good place. Yeah.
And
for filming, because there's an upstairs situation, and you could film down onto the stage quite. In fact, I used to film through the swing doors, and they had a round circular viewing hole. You know, I used to stand back a bit from that and actually use that to frame some of my pictures.
yeah, so and I think it was. I mean, although we knew you better as a photographer, you'd also be someone we'd ring up when we were in trouble on. And I remember you coming out when my gearbox exploded, coming down the A12 in the Blue Luton.
That was true.
I'd put a gearbox in from a short wheelbase.
Had you really? I didn't know that.
No, you probably didn't. You'd probably killed me.
I had no idea. I wouldn't have allowed that if I'd known.
And so, but it fitted. And then we'd been up the A1, we'd come through Stamford, we're on our way back, and we're coming down the A14.
That's right, the A45.
And it exploded.
Yeah.
And then the
explosion could be heard from miles. There's no other traffic on the road at 5 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday.
And the prop shaft just
leapfrogged the van over, didn't the van stayed on four wheels?
It there and squashed the brake pipe and things, but the brakes still worked. So you drove out in your little J4 van and pulled this 1.5 ton Luton van full of equipment back to Ipswich in the little BMC J4.
That's right. In fact, what we did, we loaded all the stuff from the back of John's van into my van, so it had the stability. Then I towed your van, which was then half empty.
But we couldn't move the coffin. Because the coffin, if you remember, which was the keyboard player, and we had this huge box, which had
we left that.
That was it had both the keyboards and the organ and the keyboards in, and so incredibly heavy. And I remember coming across with Dick, the bass player. There was always a couple of people pulled the short straw that went in the front of my van rather than the cars. And
we did have a car, didn't we?
You had cars.
Chris had a car, did he then?
It might be Tim. But
Hillman, wasn't it?
Yeah, there was a Hillman involved because I remember borrowing that in Wales, and I nearly got stuck on a hill farm and left the van on the other side of Wales. But we were coming across the fens and we picked up a hitchhiker, so I must have just had one person, Dick, in the front. And so without thinking, Dick and I are talking about the coffin in the back of the van.
Oh no!
and we could see this look of horror
Oh, John.
on this poor hitchhiker's face. So that was
But I mean, life really for us was a lot of fun, wasn't it? And we couldn't be doing anything without having a really good crack up, with a giggle. And
it was really smooth,
Yeah.
rarely smooth.
yeah,
But,
superficially smooth.
yeah.
So when you stopped doing the GPO stuff,
Yeah.
started doing photography, did that become a career?
That did.
How quickly did that happen?
Instantly, really, over a few months. I'd saved enough money up to pay my mortgage for about a year. And so I just...
You were saying earlier you started in photography quite young, didn't you?
Yeah,
So
I
that
did.
was
The
scary.
first photo I sold was at school. The headmaster left, and I took photos of him on the stage with a little 120 size film camera, which had no real viewer, just about you could see through it. You know, no kind of viewing through the lens.
Or the Kodak 120.
Yeah, Kodak. Right, yeah.
Brownie.
Yeah. Well, that was the rectangular format. So
Oh, the little thin one.
no, the same size film as that, but you
Oh,
only
yeah.
got 8 on a film.
Oh yes, that was the almost a box, wasn't it? It was a box camera.
No, it was a fancy, plastic Kodak. So it wasn't the box camera. It was one stage on from that.
Oh,
Sorry.
oh, so well, no, I'm impressed that you had one of those.
Well, no,
at
as a
school.
Christmas present, I did have a box camera initially, and I used to use that to good effect.
Oh.
And I used to
Yeah.
do your own work at school. They had a dark room for 60, 65.
Quite progressive idea.
Yeah,
That's cool.
indeed.
So well, I mean, the plastic camera that
Yeah.
us that didn't pretend to be photographers had was of course a Brownie 125,
Right, John.
which was a little plastic camera.
Yeah.
A Kodak Brownie 125. But they had these the photographs were tiny.
Yeah. Well, they like a cassette film camera.
No, they were. It was a
Film
roll.
on a roll.
Film on a roll. Yes.
Okay.
The cassette one came later. The little, and they were lovely. You could
The
fit them in.
110, wasn't it?
Yeah, you could fit them in your top pocket.
Yeah.
That was sort of precursor to the.
Do you know I've never seen you with a camera in your hand, John?
No, because I had a good photographer.
Do you know? I think I was quite good.
Yeah, you were.
Thank you. I look at some of my old work, when I was at school, and I could see the makings, although I couldn't really see that at the time.
So, what are you doing now, as far as photography is concerned?
No, I've just got loads of films, loads of frames that I'd always planned because I didn't work in photography for very long. 86 time, 85, it was all going over to digital, so I didn't really have a great deal of time with real film, and but I have got all of my work on that. So what am I doing now? I had suddenly an amount of film frames, and I thought at a certain age I'm going to sit down or sort through them and try and print up everything I've taken. That was my ambition, so that was an ambition for the distant future, really. And now I'm starting to think in this mode.
So it's like a photographic version of Pootling through, really. Yeah.
Is there like a one common theme through it, like several recurring subjects that you return to?
No, I didn't really pick subjects. Subjects really seem to find me. Often and certainly something I would never have thought of doing, for instance, was someone phoned me up and they were a patent agent and they wanted me to photograph their patents. So he'd supplied the film, and a print of each thing, and he wanted me to do, say, 50 of each of them. So, and that's really obscure, and I never really got to the root of that. But I did actually go down to the patents office myself. I had things I wanted to patent as well in that period. So I spent quite a bit of time in London, living in London in the early 90s and getting to know London, East End, cycling, and had a van, much as John really. And I used to come back to Ipswich and meet up with the guys and go back and just do my stuff down there. So,
what brought you back?
my girlfriend kept turning up when I was living down there. She actually said, "Tony, go down to London and find yourself a squat." And I found a squat because they're all totally legal. And once I found it, she kept coming after me. She got rid of me because she'd worked in London when she was a typist with her cousin. They went to live down there. And so she inspired me to say, "Tony, why don't you clear off and go down?" I did, and I found somewhere to live, and it was a 3-bedroom flat. And often people think of squats as being, people where masses of people live. But in this tower block, there's an asbestos tower block, and it's been knocked down eventually. And we're living in it, and it's totally safe, and all the amenities were on, the lifts were on. I could look out of one of the windows and see the curvature of the Thames and Tower Bridge, etc. It's wonderful. Commercial road area.
Yeah, there was, and we were talking about this. There was, although it was a very depressed time as far as financially was concerned, and so people didn't think it was odd that you'd do odd jobs to scrape a living, because the fact that you were able to scrape a living at all was miraculous at that point.
Well, really, there's often an inspiration from others. Like John. When at one time I got really tight on my paying my mortgage on the house, and John said, "Oh, he scrabbled around and found me some work, didn't you, John?" I was always getting loads, and we became quite buddies really because of that. We started working together, and that wasn't just help John was giving me, but as reciprocal, and so we formed the age of this kind of closeness really, in the sense of.
Yeah, so that was it. But you could actually do stuff. I mean, talking about the squats, but it was very much, it gets back to that do it yourself. It's a little pre-pun, but it was all that was coming together because of mainly the recession that was going on then, and the fact that it was all falling apart. But it did leave a freedom to do stuff. Well, not punk was coming up. It's going parallel to. I mean, I was drifting between all the different scenes, if you like.
So what sprung to mind is there's a Chris Pettit film, Radio 1, and that's set in mostly Bristol, I think, 76, I think it is, or 75. And when you watch it, it's quite bleak, black and white film. When you watch it, you really get a sense of how broken England was back then, or Britain was, and it's like it's easy to forget now. I think quite how abandoned London looked or Bristol looked. All the big corporate buildings were empty. There was no work. There was no money for anybody, and you still bomb sites from the war. You watch episodes of The Sweeney, you get a real sense of it. Especially around the docks, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Ipswich was lucky because we hadn't quite, at that point, we hadn't really got rid of our heavy engineering. Cranes were still existing. And of course, there was the new stuff on BT. So we were becoming a sort of technological centre because Martlesham was the BT. Well, it was their development place, wasn't it? So I remember I drove at that point for Newey and Air, and I was taking out all the electrical equipment for them. And there'd be security on, and there wasn't much security in those days going in and out of factories, or anywhere. I mean, and but because they were doing military stuff and a lot of secret stuff. You got to,
So Ipswich back then was still quite wealthy as a town. Lots of work.
well, not. It was changing. There was it was different. There was a lot of out of work. There was loads of people out of work, young people out of work, because all the cranes jobs and things were taken by, that a generation already, were there for the height of our engineering history. If you were technical minded at the top end, it's a bit like now at the top end. So the Martlesham, BT Martlesham would be taking all those people, but there was stuff closing all the time at the same time. So there was a younger generation that had well, there was two things going on. People didn't want to do, I mean, cranes was dangerous. You go there, people work there, they come back with sort of burn holes in their legs from sort of molten metal
yeah.
and stuff, and so young people didn't want to do that. A lot of them went back later, so there was a lot of staying out of work at that point. But Ipswich Ipswich, and there were still the docks, and so there was.
We still had chandleries. We still had, people working on sails for the sailboats. So you could get a fancy engine for your motor yacht, or buy a sail for your 110-year-old sailing barge. There's a kind of a variation depending on where you're really viewing the pleasantness or the. I mean, obviously, sailing a big old barge was hazardous because it often required one man and a boy, and that was pretty hairy, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, there was sailing barges were a big thing around here. There used to be a sailing barge race from
still is. We still have the sailing barge race.
what, from Shotley to Penmill.
Yeah,
it starts at Penmill, doesn't it?
And Ipswich it starts off.
And
Yeah,
so
I might be wrong. Yeah.
no, it probably is, because there's still a lot of restored sailing barges. But one of the last working sailing barge captain was a guy called Bob Roberts, who lived at Penmill and was a folk singer. And do you remember Pete Jennings, who ran the folk program on the radio, on Radio Orwell? Pete used to sit next to Bob Roberts outside Penmill on the bench.
That used to be amazing.
And
the old boys in the Penmill pub, they were sitting by the fire, the old fishermen, and with their, in the 60s. Just another pitch, an absolute, an anachronism, really.
Yeah, and so every time Pete got a note wrong, Bob would clip him around here. But but Bob still kept a working barge, and he was working as he was a folk singer, and he'd be booked in a folk club, and he was supposed to have a load in Belgium, and he'd do the gig, and then he'd tell the people in Belgium, "Oh, tide was running the wrong way," and but there was. It was this wonderful mixture, and of course the sort of Caribbean population was in here, and the American bases. I mean, there was a whole economy run off the American bases. So
perhaps that's why it probably wasn't quite so bad as it might have been if we hadn't lived around town. I mean,
I've heard it said that this part of the world went into depression in 1300.
Oh yeah, we went through a 400-year recession. It was what brought us, what created the recession?
There was the London. They suddenly realised that you could tax the sugar and the wine coming in from
and
Holland.
the wool tax was the big one.
Wool tax, the taxational aspects, and yeah.
So there was a huge smuggling. Tradition down this coast. Sure. There was more stuff coming in the 1700s. There was more stuff coming in illegally along the coast of
Probably
Essex
legally.
than going legally through the port of London. And so, and Molster, you remember Molster, the bass player?
Yeah, Tony Moles.
Called Tony Moles, right? So he used to live out at Watcham, didn't he? He's not in Debenham now, but he
Debenham,
grew up in Watcham.
Did he really? I didn't know.
He told me there was little coals cut in the hedges in the things that have been there for hundreds of years, and what they were where they where the pack horses would change loads, because there'd be a load taken at the coast and they'd be moved by pack horse, and then they'd be swapped every so occasion, and so they'd drop off their load in these little cut-offs in the hedge and be picked up by the next lot and taken in. And a farm boy in those days would earn sort of a shilling for the whole season after his keep, but he could earn 2 and 6 by borrowing a pack horse. And so there's always been, it's never been a particularly revolutionary area, but it has been, although Burston school strike on the north of the county is the longest running strike in British history. It's always been on the fiddle, hasn't it? Wouldn't you say?
Well, there you go.
As an area.
As an area.
Yes.
I think, I mean, you look at Essex and the smuggling that came in there, if we go back to that, because of all the salt flats and all I mean, that wasn't, no way for miles would you find anything that resembled a town or a village. And people used to live, just off the sea and fishing, and whoever was their landlord probably rarely saw them, probably lived in Chelmsford or somewhere like that.
Well, even up here, the Ostrich, which is a pub coming up from in Ipswich by Bourne Bridge. We've already talked about Bourne Bridge. On the edge of Ipswich, the Ostrich was a smuggling pub.
I think it's the Oyster Reach.
No, you're the Oyster. Yeah.
There's the Ostrich and the Oyster Reach. It's the same pub.
Yeah.
Just that they found that they wanted to change the name for something. Yeah, it's the Ostrich originally, wasn't
it? Yeah, in my memory serves it's the Ostrich, but then I'm very ancient. So, and there was kind of all. I think what was great about that period.
That was like out of the way, wasn't it? It was miles from town at one time in its existence, and at the end of Worsted Road, which it was like nowhere near Ipswich, a totally independent state.
Yeah, what was great is that there was this great oral history within the town because of people that have been here for generations, and because being on the coast, it's people come this far and there's nowhere else to go, so you kind of stay, and so there'd be, even if your family hadn't been there, there'd be someone else's family that'd tell you stories that were going back hundreds of years.
Sure.
And like your back garden, which in itself, when you dug it up, was going back hundreds of years.
Well, I didn't find anything 100 years old, but just a few years. I'd love it. I was really optimistic about finding some treasure there.
You ever speculated as to how you had a telephone box buried in your back garden?
Well, no, we reckon that the previous owner worked for that company.
Doesn't explain why he buried it.
No. So obviously, perhaps he wanted something from the boxes. He might have wanted the panes of glass, or he might have wanted scraps. I didn't. But you couldn't get people to pick the rubbish up. They didn't actually come and pick. So they used to bury it.
I used to do that in my back garden. Was we'd get because the post office would. The post office would take down the old metal
bits off the poles.
Well, the Crittles windows.
All right. Okay.
So there was that was a lot of metal scrap. You couldn't have the glass. Really. You couldn't weigh in the glass. They wouldn't accept that.
No.
So we used to take the we used to take the glass, to put them over a zinc bath and break the glass. And so we just had the metal frames and weigh it in at Sackers, because we always weighed in at Sackers,
We did,
which was pretty near where
you lived almost.
well,
just round the corner.
off Bramford Road. No,
I'm joking.
It was Southgate's. It was round the corner for me. But Sackers Yard.
They were good days, John. They were good days.
And then what do you do with the glass? You've got all this glass. You can't pay to have someone take it away.
You can't melt it down, can you?
No,
really?
so I dug big holes. And also the person who must have lived before me, because when I dug up the bottom of the back garden, there was all these old motorcycle parts in there. They buried all these old motorcycles. So that's how people got rid of things. So they buried them. And it's so anyway, have you anything else you want to say about those times, Tony?
Not really, John. I mean, we could actually, if we weren't being filmed, carried on for all night. If the bottle of whiskey lasted that long. But we have spent many early morning finishing off our conversations and saying, "Oh, I think I better go. Perhaps I can have a coffee." And then a couple of hours later, you'd eventually drift on.
Well, we used to get back from the gig at 2 o'clock in the morning, and then spend till the next morning leaving the house. So it's been good to see you again after all these years.
Thank you, John. Thank you, my dear friend. It's great to see you. I haven't seen you for about 9 or 10 years.
Fantastic.